Hi, I'm Jim McCann, founder of 1-800-Flowers. We created this podcast to share the wonderful people we get to interact with, we get to meet, we get to know, and most importantly, get to learn from. So I invite you to join us on this journey here on the Celebrations Chatter podcast. Hey, Charles, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. Find you in California today?
Yeah, I'm in Santa Cruz. How about you?
Getting sunny, Southwest Florida, Naples area.
Oh, that's nice.
I'm going to confess that doing research for our conversation today, I knew I'd be a fan of yours because the subjects you're interested in and curious about are subjects I'm interested in and curious about. Only you go about it with a lot more gusto.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you.
I'd love to trace back. I'm so curious about your career and upbringing. Now, I know you lived in New York for a while, but born in New Mexico, huh?
Yeah. Born in Albuquerque, New Mexico. My dad actually, so my dad who's now passed away, unfortunately, he was born in 1929 and he moved to Albuquerque in the 1950s. Like back when it was like really a frontier town.
Tumbleweed town, huh?
Yeah. I mean, the Manhattan Project had only happened like 5 years earlier up in the Los Alamos Mountains.
Sure.
And he was a lawyer and he actually had this plan. He grew up in Iowa. He had served in the military, came back, wanted to leave Iowa. And so he said, I'm going to go to Phoenix, Albuquerque, and Little Rock. And the first place I get a job, I'm going to take that job. And if I don't get a job, then I'm going to go to medical school, because in Little Rock, they had a program where you could go to medical school for free if you practiced in Arkansas.
Wow.
And so he went to Phoenix, didn't get a job in Phoenix, went to Albuquerque, got a job in Albuquerque. So that's where me and my 9 siblings all grew up.
There are 10 of you?
Yeah.
Wow, that's a noisy household.
That's a noisy household. It's true. You know, by the time I'm third from the bottom, so by the time I came along, the older ones were mostly off on their own. You know, they had
and it seemed like you had about 11 parents then, huh?
Yes, that's exactly right. Well, and even today, you know, speaking of grandchildren, my dad, gosh, I don't even know how many grandchildren he has at this point. But yeah, the thing about being in Albuquerque is like every weekend is a birthday party, and every birthday party is like 40 family members. So you probably understand this. You can sympathize
and love and appreciate it.
Yes, exactly.
It's, you know, it reminds me, my son, my second child, my son James, he lived in California, he lived in the Midwest, and he called one Sunday night, he and I are chatting. He was driving back from someplace, and he said, you know, I'm thinking of moving back to New York. I said, yeah, what are you thinking? He says, well, remember all that stuff I complained about? You know, all those family parties, birthdays and anniversaries and holiday get-togethers. He said, when you don't have any of them, they're not such a pain in the neck anymore. In fact, you really miss them.
Yeah. No, it's true. It is absolutely true.
So do you guys get back to Albuquerque to recharge those batteries?
We do. We try and get back at least once or twice a year. We were just there for Thanksgiving. And since my dad passed on, my mom is still living there, and so we like moved her into a new house and kind of got everything all set up there. And so it was yeah, it's good. It's good to go back. It's really nice to. Although I have to say, I do miss New York too. We lived in Brooklyn.
Oh yeah,
I loved living in Brooklyn.
Did you live in the Heights?
We were actually in Windsor Terrace, so right south of the park.
Great spot.
Yeah,
and just keeps getting nicer and nicer.
Yeah, and more expensive.
Yeah, that too. And now you said your dad found a job in Albuquerque when he didn't find one elsewhere. What did he do?
He was a lawyer. He was a trial lawyer. Yeah. So he eventually, like, another trial lawyer hired him. And then
were there 2 trial lawyers in Albuquerque?
Well, the problem is there was only one, and he was starving. So as soon as there's a second one, that's when they start doing okay. Did you spend your whole career at 800-Flowers? Was that your first?
All of my adult life. I've only had 2 career kind of jobs. First one was in the social services. I ran a home for teenage boys, group homes.
Oh, wow.
Then all the group homes, then became the administrator of the place. So I loved that. It was great life training in so many ways. And I found myself looking through your books, reading through, in particular, the book on conversations, which is coming out this month, right?
Right. It's coming out February 20th. Yeah.
But yeah, learning about supercommunicators and a subject I'm curious and very interested in. When reading the previews on your book, I found myself several times thinking about conversations I had in those group homes,
Huh,
which really
that's
were
interesting.
life-changing for me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've been a florist and running a gift company now for 47 years. And for 14 years, I was in the social services. So I had a 10-year overlap where I was doing both.
That's an interesting transition. Did you love doing 1-800? I mean, 1-800 flowers, calling yourself a florist is like Michael Jordan saying, like, I play some pickup ball. Like, did you love 1-800 flowers? Was it a,
You do all the steps, and you start out, you're the only person, and then you figure out that there's someone better than you at everything you know how to do. And so that was the growth. But I would say that for me, the working intensely like I did, living in a group home with 10 teenage boys when I was several months older than my oldest boy when I started. uh, really was life-changing for me. It taught me a lot about communications. The first lesson, and I thought of this in reading your work, is I tried to have a relationship with the group. And you don't have relationships with groups.
yeah,
And it was a tough lesson to learn, but then I was deliberate about learning to have a different kind of relationship with each of the guys.
that's
And
interesting.
then life changed for me.
And are these kids, the guys who are in the group home, are they're foster children, or they've been in trouble? Like what
All of the above.
Okay.
Tough kids have had very, very tough circumstances, and they were sent to us as sometimes as because they had nowhere else to go, or sometimes to an alternative to some kind of incarceration.
So they're probably pretty guarded. They probably are not willing to have real conversations right away.
extremely guarded, and their defenses were barbed wire.
Yeah.
They weren't going to let you in.
So what'd you do? How did you break through?
Well, the same things that you teach in your work, I learned. I'll give you, for instance, there was one fellow, his name was Joe, and if you read his case record, you'd be in tears before you got to the third page. The product he was from, and he had a thing about touching. So you might be old enough to remember the movie Stripes, and there was a guy named Francis. If you touch me, I'll kill you. Well, Joe was very much, if you touch me, I'll kill you. And he had beautiful black hair that he always combed just perfectly with a part on the side and his back, and he took great pride in his hair. So if you touched him, he'd kill you. If you went near his hair, he'd dismember you first. And Joe, it wasn't really a big problem for me. We had 10 boys in the house, and it wasn't really a behavior problem for me, except if he went off, he went really off. And so I was trying to find a way to connect with him. And so I went right at his nerve. And I'd come in, I worked from 4 to midnight, Charles. And so I'd come in and I'd find a way to bump into him. Now, normally that would be pulling the pin on a grenade, but he realized I was doing it intentionally, and it sort of became our thing. And I'd have to, the first 5 or 10 minutes of showing up for work, I'd do that evening shift and sleep over. I was the in charge person sleeping over until staff came in the morning. And if I didn't find him in that first 5 or 10 minutes of being around the house, he would think that I was dissing him and we'd have a problem. So, and it got to the extreme where I'd find him sitting in a chair and I'd come over from behind and mess up his hair. And he'd, oh, he did it again. This is ridiculous. And he'd go in and comb his hair in the bathroom and in the mirror. But that's how much we bonded.
Yeah.
And each and every guy in the house, I found a way to get our thing, our relationship. Because as corny as it sounds, and you tripped onto it there, is that defenses were very rigid.
Yeah.
And high barred, but they wanted to know that there were rules, and they wanted to know what the boundaries were, and they wanted to know they were cared for.
Well, and what I love about that story, Joe was his name. That was the kid's name.
Yeah.
You actually showed him that you were listening to him by basically disregarding what he was right, by like kind of making it a joke to say like, I hear you when you say like you don't like people touching you, you don't want people messing with your hair, like, and to show you that I'm hearing you, I'm going to actually go out of my way to do it because this is kind of a fun thing that we share.
That's why I found myself back there when I was reading your work. That it's all about relationships. It's all that matters in the world.
It is all that matters. And it's interesting to hear you say that. I mean, as a business person, did you find that was true? Like when you were connecting with your employees, was it the same as connecting with your with the boys in the group home?
Well, yes, and learning to listen differently, or how to listen and form a response. So when you talk about hear, help,
Yeah, and hug.
or a hug, I wasn't smart enough to go to a smarty pants school like you did, Charles. I mean, look at the education you had: Yale, and then this little place in Cambridge called Harvard for your master's. So not going to those places. My Harvard was St. John's Home for Boys.
Yeah.
But it was all about relationships, and your speed learning there. What you learned there were the same tools I use at work when I had one flower shop or 40 flower shops, or today. Is my job is not to do anything anymore. It's to convince people that they can do things that they couldn't imagine they can do, and that they have license to do that. And yeah, I hear you when you say, geez, I've never done this before. I don't really know what to do. I hear you, but then I got to figure out if you really want me to help you.
And would you just ask? Like, if you ask them, like, do you want my help? Or are you just telling me, like, would they respond to that? Or was it?
I wouldn't say that I learned that early enough. Surely my wife wants me to solve that issue for her.
Exactly. Exactly. Oh, you had a tough day? I can tell you 5 things you should have done differently that would have made it better. Really goes over well.
So what's it like in your household? How old are your children now?
So I have a 12-year-old and a 15-year-old. They're about to turn 13 and 16.
Yeah, okay. These are the interesting years. Get ready.
Yeah.
Buckle up.
They're both boys. So that makes it a little bit easier.
A little easier.
Yeah. It's and it's actually been great. I mean, what's funny is that my communication with my wife has definitely gotten better because of this book. I think because we just ask each other those questions more. We say, like, do you want me to solve your problem, or do you want me to
You were doing research.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But with my kids, the thing that I found is, there's this idea of asking deep questions that you should ask how people feel. Don't ask them about the facts of their life, ask them about how they feel about their life. And I found that with my kids, I used to ask them, like, what'd you do today? Did you learn anything? And they would say, like, yes, no, like the one word answers. But then I started asking questions like, what was the best part of today? Or like, I know that you hung out with Jasper after school. Like, what do you admire about Jasper? Like, what do you like about him? And like, of course, once you do that, it's like taking the cork off the bottle, right? Like all of a sudden they have all these opinions they want to share with you. And you have,
and that was such a lesson in reading your work there. I was saying, I'm an old guy, but I got a lot more to learn.
Yeah, that's very kind of you. But it's kind of, and I think we intuitively know this, right? Like when we meet someone who asks, you're very good at asking questions, and the questions you're asking me are questions about, like, basically, like, how does this create who you are? How does this affect you? What do you make of this? And those are questions that people love to answer, and that it tells us so much about who they are.
In being an expert on habits and habit formation and how to work faster, smarter, better, do your boys ask you about your work?
No, they are completely uninterested in my work, which I think is actually fine. I mean, we talk about a lot of stuff that is work related. Like one of my kids is really into engineering, and he loves like learning about stocks and financial markets and stuff like that. Yeah, he's really, and so we talk a lot about that, and like I think he understands that I'm answering these questions. I know the answers, or we can talk about it because of my work, but my actual day-to-day, they're not really that interested in. And now that you mention it, I actually don't think I ever asked my dad. Like, I knew he was a lawyer and I felt like I knew what he did, but I'm not certain I ever asked him, like, what did you do at work today? As a kid, it never even occurred to me. I don't know. Did your kids ask you about that? Like, did you?
No, because, being in the floral business, I'd be recruiting them to work all the time.
Right.
So they avoided me a lot.
They were terrified to ask you.
Yes.
You might say, it's a good thing you asked, because you're going to come in this Saturday to help me out with it.
And that happened all the time. So in our family, we developed a rule. That is, you had to work while you were in school. Even through college, you can work, but you can work for us, but you don't have to. So get a job. And the next rule was, and when you graduate, you cannot work for us.
Really?
For a minimum of 5 years. And then you can only consider coming back, apply to come back, if you've achieved something somewhere else, a graduate degree achievement in work someplace else, a couple of promotions, things like that. So we've had, between my brother and I, my sisters worked in the business on and off through their careers. But my brother and I work together now for 40 years.
How does it, so let me ask you, because you built this with your brother, right? You started it and then he came in pretty early in the process.
Yeah, I was 10 years in when he came in.
Okay. And with your kids too, how does it change when they're family? And because business, there's always things there's little things that come up, right? I think one thing, you think a different. How does that change when it's family?
It's better. It can be better or worse. For us, it was better because my relationship with Chris, I left the house when he was 6 and I was 17. He was 7, I was 17, went off to college. And so our relationship was not so much brothers and never rivals. It was always much more fraternal.
Yeah.
And or paternal. And so that made it easier for us. It was always good to have someone you could close the door of the office and say something that you couldn't say without going to jail in public company. That guy is an idiot, So for us, it was always good. And he retired last year. And so I miss having him around all the time to share things with and to ask his opinion on or let him do all the hard work. So for us, it was all in a great 40 years working together.
Yeah, it's my little sister is a lawyer, and she practiced with my dad for a while, and she said the same thing. Like, I think she had this relationship with him that I never had because I didn't work with him in the law.
Yeah.
And it is really special, right? Because so much of our life is spent at work. So much of what like our self-worth, about what we care about, how we find meaning in life, is what we do for 8 to 10 hours a day. And to be able to share that with the people that you love the most is really special.
Especially because I think that the tough lesson we learned, it seems certainly that you have, is that the people who say, I'm going to compartmentalize this is my work life, this is my social life, this is my family life. We didn't have that choice in my family because as a floral business, we're all working. Everyone's drafted to work at the holiday time. Our holidays are later than everybody else's, maybe a week later than everybody else's, because if it's Mother's Day, we're busy.
Yeah.
So we had that in common. There were 5 of us, and next generation. My parents worked with me when they were alive. My dad had his own business, but if he wanted to see us, he came and was our best router for deliveries at holiday time because he knew every address. and my mom worked full time for us at the end of her life, and was terrific having her there all the time. So we early on learned you couldn't do that separation, that work and family and social all entwined. And frankly, I preferred that, and I still do.
And to be honest, I think it's kind of a myth that you can compartmentalize these things, right? Because the truth of the matter is, if you do, you're not bringing your full self to any one of them.
And work is social, right?
Yeah, work is a hugely social, and it's interesting and it's fun to talk about, but it's also fun to talk about your home life and your friends when you're at work, right? I think that in the book, there's this study that's mentioned, the adult Harvard happiness study.
Yes.
It's been around for almost 100 years now. It has all these different names, basically based on who's giving it money in particular decades.
And there have been several.
Yes, exactly. It started as the Grant study. And what they found, they wanted to figure out who lives longest. You know this because you read it. Who lives longest and who's happiest and who's ultimately most successful in kind of a holistic way. And they find that the only thing that really predicts it is the number. If you have strong, deep connections to a handful of other people at age 45, you will be healthier and happier and more successful at age 65. And the thing I carried away from that, getting back to work, is to have deep, meaningful connections with other people means that you are really sharing who you are and they are sharing who they are. And that means that you're sharing all parts of yourself. I don't know that I could have a deep, meaningful connection with someone who knows nothing about my work, isn't interested in my work. I have friends, we live in Santa Cruz. I have friends I go surfing with, and they're good surfing friends. I like them, but they're not great friends, right? Yep. Because they don't know all of me and I don't know all of them. And And that's okay for some
But
people, but
those are important relationships too.
absolutely, absolutely.
But not in lieu of, right?
Yes, exactly. You got to have some of those real relationships.
What do we find going through COVID about the breadth of the relationships we have?
It's a really good question. I'd be curious your answer to this. So there's a lot of social behavior that's just habit, right? And to develop that habit, we have to practice it. And I think people fell out of practice in COVID. And it was such a sudden shift, right? You were in New York.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was too. So like New York got it worse than anyone else, right? Like it was literally in 2 days, everything shut down. And then you started hearing about like, the bodies piling up.
Who knew you missed your barista?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Right. Who knew the subway? I used to ride the subway every day. And like, if you'd asked me my favorite parts of New York, it would not have included the subway. But like suddenly when I hadn't ridden it for a month, I felt like it's just interesting. It's interesting to look at other people. So the thing that is happening now is I think people are relearning how to connect. And that's one of the reasons I wrote the book. But a lot of our social habits have changed, right? I don't think there's as many like barbecues as there used to be.
I think you're right. And in your work, you write about the impact of digital communications and the new rules. And well, I've learned those rules the hard way. You say tone down the sarcasm. That's a hard one because it can be misinterpreted so easily.
Oh, right.
Without the nuance of inflection and facial expression.
Yeah. And our kids, I'm sure this is true for your grandkids. They probably know how to do this intuitively, right? Like at this point, they know like, oh, a text is different from an email is different from calling someone on the phone. Like there's different
rules. An Instagram post, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They've intuited it, and we will too if we spend enough time doing it and thinking about it. It's interesting. There was this study that was done, right when telephones became popular, like 100 years ago.
I remember.
You do? Back when 1-800 simply was like a series of numbers. Nobody knew.
It was just one. It was Mabel, get me the flowers.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So there were all these articles that appeared in like periodicals saying, we don't think that the telephone will ever be used for real conversations because you can't see each other. So basically people said it's going to be like the telegraph. They're going to use it to send stock orders or grocery lists. And what's interesting is they actually transcribed some of those early conversations, and they're exactly right. People did not know how to have a conversation on the telephone.
It was something that had to be learned, huh?
It's something that had to be learned. And by the time, of course, you and I were teenagers, you could talk for like 7 hours a night, right? And feel like this is the most important.
Not in my house.
Right. No, nor in mine, actually. But what happens is that we learn the different rules so that we don't even recognize that they're rules.
My grandkids who grew up digitally didn't have to learn that.
They didn't have to learn it. It was obvious from the start. And you and I are learning it, but we those mistakes stand out more in our mind because that's how we learn.
We put our heart into everything we do. We are farmers, bakers, florists, and makers who grow and create with a passion. Made with love at every step of the way. Because at the end of the day, we know you're sending more than a gift. 1-800-Flowers, share with love.
Let's go back a little earlier in your career. I'm fascinated. Tell us about when you living in New York, working for the New York Times.
Yeah.
But you didn't just stay in New York. You went traveling a bit.
Yes, I did. I spent some time in, actually, before I was at the New York Times, I was at the LA Times, and I went to Iraq. As a journalist, being a war correspondent is kind of like the height of the profession because it's one of the few places where, America sends over this incredible military force.
500,000 people.
500,000. And the thing is that Americans in a democracy, they don't actually know what they're doing over there unless the reporters are telling them. Right. So in some ways, it's this like huge obligation to your fellow citizens to be like, this is what's happening. This is how to make sense of it. This is how to make sure that your leaders are making good choices. So that felt really, really satisfying. The thing that I discovered was you're just in a war zone. You're just tense all the time, like a level of tenseness that I've never experienced otherwise. And there's good parts of that and bad parts. One of the good aspects of it is that you feel effortlessly alive all the time. Like you make it to the end of the day and you're like, I stayed alive today. I deserve a drink. I deserve to feel good about myself. I embedded a couple of times with the military in Iraq, and what they would, I'd go out on missions with them. And what they would say before the mission is they would say, it is not our job to keep you alive. Like it is your job to keep you alive. So if we're pulling out,
that sobers you up instantly.
Yeah. Oh, immediately. And they're like, if we're pulling out in the Humvee and you're not in the Humvee, we're leaving you there. And have you spent much time in the Middle East?
A little bit, not a lot.
Okay. So my wife and I lived in Egypt right after we graduated from college.
What a great adventure.
Oh, it was awesome. So we've spent a good amount of time there. The Middle East, it's just a beautiful part of the world. And Iraq is actually like physically a beautiful, not the buildings, but Baghdad is a beautiful city because it has this, this river that runs through the middle of it. And there's these banks that are gorgeous. And so it's an interesting place. I have not been back there for almost 20 years now. So I don't know what it's like these days, and of course things are just crazy right now in the Middle East.
When you talk about war correspondents being the top of the heap there in the journalism world, I think of Richard Engel at NBC News.
He's amazing.
I've met his dad a few times, and to see someone who's so into what they do,
yes,
and wants to be at the hottest of the hot spots. It's a different DNA, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And it can get troubling, right? Because you get addicted to that.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's like adrenaline junkies, like in any profession, where like you sometimes lose perspective and you start making choices based on what feels right instead of what is right. I will say though, that being said, Richard like is, I mean, not only is he like so courageous, he's actually a great journalist. Like if you watch the footage he captures, some of it's just like breathtakingly amazing.
And his ability to articulate what's going on in concise and understandable form is just an art.
Yeah, no, I agree. So the downside is that you come back to the US and it takes a little while to readjust. It's also, there was a period when I was in Iraq when I just felt like I was just like steeped in death. Like everything is about death. Everything is about, like avoiding death or seeing death or the recovery from death. And that can be kind of trying. It is such a blessing to have a life where you don't have to worry about stuff like that every day. We're very lucky.
I can't imagine what it's like.
It's rough, and hopefully it'll get better, right?
Now, how did your wife do through your time in Iraq?
Not she was a trooper. She like never said anything, but the reason I stopped doing it is because I realized how selfish it was.
Yeah.
I mean, you do feel like you're doing good work and it's important work, but at the end of the day, you're doing it because like you want the experience, and it's just so cruel to the people that you've left back in the US or left at home because they're worried about you every single day and there's nothing they can do about it.
And you're not.
Right. I'm anxious, but I'm not, it's not that worry. Like I feel that now with my kids, right? Like that anxiety that like, I just want you to be happy and healthy, like just be safe. And at the end of the day, there's
all that habit training you've done with them, did it take hold?
Well, one of them keeps asking me for like one of these like crazy e-bikes that can go like 30 miles per hour. So I'm not sure that it's taken hold.
Charles, one of the projects you did, not only did you have this great education, it sounds like you grew up in a wonderful family environment and get to go to these great schools, but the other cherry on the sundae of your career highlights so far, besides the success of your 3 books, is your Pulitzer-Prize. Tell us about that.
So I wrote a series right when The Power of Habit, my first book, came out. I was working on a series for the Times about Apple. This was in 2012, and we wanted to explain globalization. But the problem is, like, globalization is so boring. Like, you say globalization and most people. So I was like, what if we told, right, exactly. What if we told the story of globalization through one company that everyone is kind of infatuated with, Apple, because they're the best embodiment of it, right? Like, so
they sure are.
Yeah, we did these investigations of the factories where they make the iPhones and the iPads, about how they use taxes, moving money around the world to avoid taxes.
How they string up nets outside the upper floors of their factory building.
Yeah. So what's so interesting is I thought that the reason the supply chains were in China, and you probably already know this, is because it was the labor's cheaper, but that's actually not really it. It's because all the supply chains are there. It's because they have a factory where you can say, like, I need 1 million screws made to this specification in 12 hours. And there's some place that can do it around the corner. Whereas we could do it in the US, but it'd take 2 or 3 days. Everything kind of moves to China to follow that. And what's interesting is a lot of the work that we did was about the overwork in these factories, like people working 16 to 18 hours a day. And Apple would say this. They would say, like, in Foxconn, they would say, like, the biggest problem we have is people are demanding to work. Like, they want to work and work and work. And
what's the saying in China? 9 by 6.
Oh, what is that? What does that mean?
They work 9 to 9, 6 days a week.
Yeah, yes,
and take pride in that. They
absolutely.
laugh at the West.
And like now they're earning much more money, right? Like China, in some ways, like the number of people brought out of poverty in China in the last 50 years is more than the rest of history and the rest of the world combined. I mean, it's just amazing.
We're seeing cracks now.
Yeah, no, we are. And it's not without cost, right? Like there's no real democracy there. If you're a Uyghur, you're basically living in like a modern day, the Holocaust. They're being interned. Yeah. But we wanted to explain that story to the world.
So you wrote a 10-piece series on how Apple works.
Yeah, with colleagues. So I had a bunch of colleagues who also wrote some of those pieces and reported with me.
But you did the heavy lifting.
I did a lot of the writing. It's it was great. It was really
and takeaways. If you were running a business after doing all that work and doing all that research, learning about the impact of culture and how to set goals in terms of what's really important here, would that make you a better business person having done that exhaustive work?
I think so. Because I think the reason why Apple was so successful and has been so successful is their ability to focus and remain focused. And I'm curious, you as a business person, if this rings true to you. You know, there's a lot of tech companies that get distracted by multiple things. You think about Cisco, right? Cisco became 1,000 different, IBM or GE, all of them had like all these divisions. Apple's kind of interesting in that when they decide to do something, they go all in on it, and they say no a lot. And they essentially sort of forced that culture onto their suppliers. So Foxconn became very, very focused on the same thing. And there's obvious downsides to that, right? Like if you make the wrong bet and you're all in on it, then the world passes you by.
Yep. I saw an example of that in just saying no. Go back about 8 or 9 years. I was involved with the New York Mets baseball team. And I was on the board, and we were going to build our new stadium. And at the same time, the New York Yankees, you might remember, they were a team up in the Bronx. They were going to build their stadium right around the same time.
Yeah.
And the family that was the controlling interest in the Mets came from the real estate development and construction industries. And so the next generation, his name was Jeff Wilpon, he was the president of the Mets, took the project to build the new stadium. And his rule was, let's get the plans right, because once we plan it, there'll be no change orders.
Huh. Interesting.
And it was tough as nails about no change orders. We're going to build this building. Our budget was $800 million, and we're going to build it. We're going to build it on time, and it's because there's not going to be any change orders. So get your plans right now, at the beginning, before we put a shovel in the ground. Up in the Bronx, they had the same budget, same time frame, $800 million. They allowed change orders. They came in at $1.6 billion in cost, and we came in and a year and a half late, and we came in on time, on budget, because Jeff would not allow change orders. And they're both beautiful buildings, and I don't see the $800 million difference.
No, literally that's doubling the budget. And yet, so let me ask you, when you were running the company, how do you keep your employees focused?
Well, that's why I have a younger brother. Division of labor.
You're the good cop, he's the bad cop.
Sometimes. Because let's try this. Let's try this. No, we're not going to do that. We already decided this is what we're going to do, and we're not change ordering.
Yeah. Are there opportunities you think you missed because you were too focused on a plan you had already established?
Very, very definitely. Chris and I talk about that often. We knew an awful lot about the internet early.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good thing and a bad thing. Everything has two sides to it, and that is, we always look at this new technology, the internet, mobile phones, social media. How can it make us a better floral and gift company? Whereas if we've been betting on which of those stocks of those companies we're working with, we might be a whole lot better off financially. But that's how we look at the world. How can we learn about these technologies? Because our internal goal is always, how does it make us better, easier, more convenient, more accessible? How do we act our customers? How do we improve our capabilities to enable our customers to act on their thoughtfulness?
Yeah.
And so, yes, we built a nice flower and gift company. Financially, we might have been better off if we pursued goals that were more along with the technology we knew quite early. And we're doing that now. And I was intrigued by your insider's view of what happened at a little shop that rocked our world since a year and a half ago, a little shop called OpenAI.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how did you have that ringside seat?
Just purely by luck. You're referring to Sam Altman, the CEO, getting fired and then rehired like in a week.
Yep.
And about 6 months prior to that, I had gone to OpenAI in Microsoft and said, I'd like to write about your relationship because I think it's really interesting.
Sure is and was.
Yeah. And so I'd spent 6 months with them. And then I literally written the story. We had sent it to the New Yorker. They were fact checking it already. And then I got a call from someone who says, by the way, they just fired Sam Altman. This is the Friday before this is the Friday before Thanksgiving. I spent the entire Thanksgiving, like we flew out to Albuquerque and then Sedona where my in-laws live. And I spent the entire time in a hotel room, like making phone calls and typing, but it was great. It was great. This is what you live for, right? It was wonderful. It's an interesting company. Are you guys doing a lot in AI? Are you guys paying a lot of attention to it?
I think the answer is yes, we're paying a lot of attention to it. Yes, it's changing how we think about a lot of things. But again, we're looking at it saying, how does it make us help our customers better? How does it broaden the range of services we can bring to our customers? Because look, the deal between Microsoft and OpenAI, where Microsoft at that point had about $10 billion invested and basically owned no stock and no voting control.
Right.
Interesting, fascinating. You must know the dynamic of that better than anybody in the world. But we know that the Googles and the Microsoft in their partnership with OpenAI, they're going to build the big rails. We have to think about how do we do our adaptations and which horses do we bet on to be the rails for us, because this is going to take so much money and so much talent. And frankly, some of the inflation in compensation over the last 6 or 7 years has been a result of Amazon and Facebook and Alphabet and Microsoft and OpenAI vacuuming up any hint of AI talent. That's a tough fight to fight.
It's an interesting point you raise, which is, because Microsoft and Google and all of them, they see themselves as platform companies. Like what they ultimately want to be is they want to be, the guys selling the pickaxes and the gold pans. But that requires companies like yours and others figuring out how to use this tech in an actual useful way, right? And I've talked to a lot of companies about generative AI and about GPT, and one of the things they say we think it's going to be revolutionary. It has not revolutionized us yet. Like we don't know how to use it in a way that is revolutionary yet.
But both could be true, right?
Yeah, no, they both have to be true, right? I think it takes, but to your point, it takes time to figure out, no matter how awesome a technology is, it's not clear at first how it ought to be used. Sometimes you just have to experiment with it. And part of that experiment is, who do you bet on, right? Who do you partner with? It's funny because I hadn't thought about it until this call, but I probably go to 1-800flowers.com like 10 times a year to order gifts for folks. I don't
Do you
think.
do you mind if I hug you?
Yeah, that's it. But
I
I
hear
don't
you. I'm not helping you, but I do want to
I
hug you.
appreciate it. I appreciate, but I don't think I've dialed the number like since I was like 16 or 18 years old, right? Like the name of the company is literally a telephone number, and like
And people don't know what telephones are.
yeah, right, exactly. It never occurs to me to actually
All
call
right,
them.
so let me tap into you on that note, give you a little pause, and say, well, people say, well, you should change the name of your company because 1-800-Flowers doesn't really mean a phone number that much anymore. It's 95% of the people come to us digitally. And then the other side of it is, well, how many times do you catch lightning in a bottle and have a brand that has 95% recognition? And I'm going to toss it away because what?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, they just went through this with HBO Max, where now it's Max instead. I know what HBO is. I've known for years what HBO is. I don't know what Max is. The guy I went to college with who would smoke in the hallway. It's crazy to me that people actually suggest that though. Cause like the brand equity around, I mean, we call that computer company Apple and everyone knows what we're talking about. And there's nothing about an Apple that has to do with electronics, right? Like,
yep.
It's the power of the brand. I actually think you guys are better having a brand that's kind of hard to remember, or not hard to remember, easy to remember, and makes you think about something. If you guys were flowers.com, it wouldn't be the same.
Yeah, I guess it's the equity we built up through.
Well, can I ask you a question on that actually? Because so I ordered some Henry and David stuff for my mom for Christmas, and it was interesting when I went. I had forgotten you guys had bought Henry and David, so I actually went
Harry and David.
So
Henry and David's the really junky outfit.
So I actually went. I googled Harry and David, and then like remembered, like when I went to the website, I remembered you guys had bought it. Like the fact that you guys have kept that brand, because Harry and David, as evidenced by the fact I just mispronounced it, is also not like the most natural, but like I associate it with quality.
For sure. So we were so fortunate 10 years ago to be able to buy it. We had tried to buy it for 10 years for that very reason. It was a brand that stood for quality. I mean, people talk about being an e-commerce company. There was nobody more vertically integrated than us. We grow the food. We have 5,000 acres of agricultural production there, but it stands for that authenticity, the history. In fact, we're celebrating 90 years of Harry and David shipping those unbelievable pairs as a gift around the world. Now, I'm sure Harry and David met some wonderful fellows in Medford, Oregon, at the local barbershop who said, "You're going to do what? You're going to take those beautiful pairs, you're going to put them in a box, and you're going to ship them by train to New York City?"
Right. You're nuts.
It worked out pretty well for them.
Yeah. And when you guys acquired, have you integrated its culture? Like, are you guys one company now, or have you kept it a separate?
It's separate because of the agricultural piece of it. I think it's, it was owned by a few different private equity firms between the original family and when we were able to buy it, and it had gone through a bankruptcy. And the folks who were there at the time running the operations, who were still running the operations there, would laugh, and they said, the next private equity firm would come in and they all say the same thing. Okay, we'll sell off all this land. But that's how they approach it. They approach it as a balance sheet. And then we came in, and the first thing we said to Matt Bowman, who runs our agricultural operations there, I said, that's a beautiful hillside, and it's right above a big orchard of ours where we grow pears. And we have orchards that grow peaches and apples and kiwis. I said, it looks so much like Napa. And I said, Matt, would that be a good place to plant grapes for Pinot Noir grapes for wine? He said, it would be perfect. And I have the plan in my back of my pickup truck here that's dusty from having proposed it for 15 different owners, all of whom laughed at it. And now you're suggesting it? I think tears formed in his eyes. And so we approach it differently, which is we're going to be here. We're going to be good stewards. So the next 90 years from now, when they're celebrating their 100th and 80th anniversary, that they're growing more and more.
Well, and it's interesting because what I hear you saying, and I hear this from a lot of good business people, is they say the key to acquiring is like not to screw up what you acquired in the first place, right? Like you're buying an agricultural expertise. Why would you go sell that land when the reason you purchase this company is because they know what they're doing?
And there's only 3 places in the world where you can actually grow this particular type of pear that Harry and David invented, and one of them was Chile, and they've thrown in the towel because they can't afford to grow them anymore. So we're it.
That's so interesting. Yeah, they're great pears. I got to say, they're really good.
So one of the things I jotted down over the weekend looking through your work was something you've articulated, something that I've thought and tried to articulate, but not nearly as well as you. So let me ask you to tee it up for us a bit here. You talk about people in customer service operations, and you use some great examples. And the bottom line of what you were saying is the key to great customer service when there is an issue isn't what you do, it's how you empathize and whether or not you care. Tell us a little bit more about that. And it goes to your most recent book, which is Supercommunicators, and tell us how that impacts how we feel. And I got a sense that you're a big fan of Maya Angelou's famous quote.
Which one?
You'll forget what people said to you. You'll forget what people did for you, but you'll never forget how they made you feel.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. And like, I mean, it's interesting because I fall into the same trap when I call customer service that like, I'm like, I've got a problem. I just want you to solve the problem as fast as possible. But of course, what I'm doing is I'm lying to myself because now I'm upset that I have this problem. Like, I feel like I want to blame someone that that I have to take time to call you, that my package didn't get there. And so the really good customer service people, they understand this isn't a practical conversation right away. This is first an emotional conversation where you are upset, and I need to acknowledge that I've heard that you are upset and that you have every right to be upset. And simply by saying, I'm sorry that this happened to you, you're exactly right. This is a mistake we made, and we're going to try and make it right. Suddenly, like, all that like angst goes away. And it's kind of amazing because it's not like saying that solves the problem. The problem still exists. But for some reason in our heads, once someone has apologized for us, we're on the same side of the table as them. We're solving the problem together, as opposed to you created a problem and you refuse to take credit for it. And we've all had that experience, right? Like, you call a company and the person who answers the phone is just so good at like saying, I'm sorry.
Put a pin in the balloon of your emotions.
Yeah, exactly. And all of a sudden, like, now we're on a practical conversation. Now we're looking for solutions.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Is it hard to teach people to do that? Like, do you find?
Yes, it is. And I remember, it's a long time ago, we hired a young man from Hofstra University on Long Island who was in the drama curriculum there, learning theater arts. And he was a terrific young man. And he would start off a training session with our customer service people by saying, you may not be a nice person. You may be a despicable, disgusting person. But in this class, I'm going to teach you how to fake it. And you're going to be able to fake like you're really a thoughtful, caring person. And he'd get them laughing like you are now. And it'd just break it down. And he'd get right to the core of it. And having a technique like that. So let me ask you in conclusion on this. Reading your work, looking at the Supercommunicators and the work that went into it, reading your first 2 books, The Power of Habit and Smarter, Faster, Better, and then seeing the work you did on Apple and the work you did on OpenAI and the body of your work, I knew I was going to like you. and so how does that attitude manifest itself in terms of, I found myself really looking forward to talking to you today.
So I'm gonna make a hypothesis, and you tell me if you think it's true, because I was looking forward to this too for very similar reasons, because I'm interested in you guys built a really amazing company. And I think the thing that seems, the chance to connect with another person who has had different experiences and wants to share them with us in an honest and vulnerable way, our brains have evolved to be thrilled by that. You know, like, communication has been Homo sapiens' superpower. right? It's what has allowed us to succeed. And our brains have evolved to crave connection.
Social intimacy.
Exactly. And that doesn't mean all connections or all social intimacy are equal, because particularly when there's someone who we can say to ourselves, like, I want to connect with this person because they have seen something different from what I have seen in the world, and I want to learn about that. That's what's really exciting. And the reason I mention that is because, and this gets back to the COVID thing, there are so many conversations right now that people shy away from because the other person is different, right?
Yeah.
We don't want to talk about politics. We don't want to talk about religion. We don't want to talk about the presidential election. Like, there's all these things that we're scared about talking about because we're just thinking like, oh God, this is going to be like, am I going to have to defend myself? Are they going to say something crazy and disappoint me? And yet, if we change our definition of what a conversation ought to be, that the success of a conversation is not about convincing the other person. The success of the conversation is not about even finding a common ground. That the success of a conversation is just about understanding each other, then a lot of those anxieties go away, because you might believe something that's totally different from what I believe. And I don't have to agree with you. I'm not going to agree with you. But if my goal is just to understand why you believe that, then suddenly you can talk about it in a real unguarded way. And I don't need to convince you I'm right. I can just tell you what I think. And I think that's why conversations like this one are so, why we get enthusiastic about them and why we look forward to them, is because it's because the other person is different. And it's fun to learn about differences. It's interesting.
It's to be celebrated, huh?
Exactly. That's exactly right. Perhaps with flowers.
I couldn't summarize it better myself. Charles, you're a talented, successful guy, and there's no secret as to why. It's just been a treat to get to know of you, and now to get to know you. If you don't mind, I'm going to be banging on your door every once in a while, because I think we just scratched the surface today. And there's so much more we'd like to hear from you.
Absolutely. I would welcome that. And thank you so much for spending some time with me. This has been just wonderful. And I'll let you know next time I'm in New York, we can get together for some pears.
Or dirty water hot dog.
Exactly. Even better.
Thanks, Charles. You're the best.
Thank you, Jim. Take care.
Go to 1-800-Flowers.com. Find the perfect gift.
And wow the people you love.
Wow. This is amazing. Whether you want to say happy birthday. So cute.
Or I love you.
I love you too. Thinking of you.
Wow.
Go to 1-800-Flowers.com. Celebrate the people you love.
Well, I hope you enjoyed what you heard, and I know I'll be sharing it forward. I hope you get to as well. Let's keep the conversation going. Follow me along on Twitter at Jim1800Flowers and on LinkedIn at Jim McCann. Hope to talk to you soon.